The gardener knelt in the center of the nursery. The earth beneath him was dry, cracked into a mosaic of hardened clay that resisted his touch. He cleared a small circle, pushing aside the brittle debris until he reached the finer, packed soil beneath. From a small pouch, he pulled a single bamboo seed. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, feeling the weight of it, before pressing it firmly into the center of the clearing. He pulled the dust back over the spot, patting the surface until it was level with the surrounding ground. He stood, walked to the nearby pump, and filled a heavy iron bucket. The water sloshed against the sides as he carried it back. He did not pour it all at once. He tipped the bucket slowly, letting the water soak into the earth in a steady, controlled stream. The brown surface darkened as it drank the moisture, absorbing the liquid until the ground turned soft and deep. He set the empty bucket down. He looked at the patch of soil, now indistinguishable from the rest of the nursery, and waited. He took a deep breath, turned, and walked toward the shed. The work had begun. 7 days later, the gardener returned. He carried a heavy watering can, the metal handle biting into his palm. He tipped the spout, watching the water pool and vanish into the thirsty, cracked earth. The ground drank the moisture, turned dark for a moment, and then settled back into a flat, brown silence. No sprout appeared, no surface tension broke. He stood there, waiting for a sign, but the nursery offered nothing back. A month passed. The sun climbed higher, baking the soil into a harder, more resistant crust. Every morning at sunrise, the gardener arrived with his bucket. He cleared away the stray weeds that dared to grow in the surrounding dirt, keeping the patch pristine. He poured the water, watching the liquid bead on the surface before soaking into the deep, hidden cracks. His routine became a steady, rhythmic pulse. He hauled the water from the pump, his muscles tightening with every trip. The weight of the bucket pulled his shoulder down, but he did not falter. He worked until the patch was saturated, then moved to the next task. The seasons began to turn, shifting from the heat of the day to the sharp chill of the evening. Still, the dirt remained flat. He never looked for a shortcut. He simply refilled his bucket, walked back to the center of the nursery, and poured, his focus locked entirely on the empty, silent ground. The seasons turned, cycling from the dry heat of summer to the biting frost of winter. The gardener kept his pace, hauling water to the same square of dirt every single morning. His routine was a fixed point in the changing landscape. Neighbors began to take notice. They walked past the nursery, slowing their stride to point at the barren patch. One morning, a group gathered near the fence. They watched him pour, then laughed. One man leaned over the gate, shouting. The gardener did not look up. He tilted the bucket, watching the water soak into the dry, unyielding surface. The laughter grew louder, echoing against the quiet nursery walls. They called him a fool for tending to nothing. The gardener set the empty bucket down, his knuckles white against the handle. He heard every word, but he did not offer a defense. He simply walked to the pump, his boots crunching on the gravel. He worked the handle, the rhythmic metallic clanking, drowning out their jeers. 2 years bled into 3. The landscape of the nursery shifted, but the patch remained a stubborn, empty square of dirt. The wind carried grit and dust across the nursery, settling over the spot like a shroud. Yet the gardener arrived every morning to clear it away. He knelt, his joints stiffening as he scraped the weeds from the perimeter. His hands were no longer soft. The skin had thickened into rough, calloused pads. Every time he hoisted the heavy buckets, a sharp, dull ache flared in his lower back, a reminder of the thousands of trips he had made. He poured the water, watching it vanish into the parched, unyielding earth without leaving a single sprout behind. The silence of the ground was absolute. It did not shift. It did not crack. It did not offer the slightest hint of life. He felt the weight of the years in his shoulders and the exhaustion in his marrow. Still, he did not stop. He stood up with a slow, deliberate effort and walked back toward the pump, to begin the cycle again. The earth remained silent. The fourth year transitioned into the fifth. The nursery grew quiet, the neighbors having long since stopped their taunts, leaving behind a vacuum of indifference. The gardener moved with a slower, more deliberate gait, his body carrying the accumulation of half a decade of unrewarded toil. He reached the patch, the earth now baked to a hard, ceramic-like consistency by the relentless sun. He knelt, the familiar ache in his knees grounding him to the spot. He pressed his palm against the dirt. It was warm, dry, and entirely unresponsive. There was no give, no hidden pulse, no sign that anything existed beneath the surface. He stood for a long moment, looking out over the nursery, the vastness of the empty space pressing in on him. The silence was no longer just an absence of growth. It felt like a wall. He picked up the bucket, the water sloshing with a hollow sound that seemed to mock the futility of his task. He poured. The liquid pooled briefly in the cracks, before being sucked into the parched depths, leaving the surface just as flat and brown as it had been on the first day. He remained on his knees, his hands resting on the damp mud, staring at the barren square. He exhaled, a long, slow breath that stirred the dust, and waited. Tuesday morning arrived, with the same pale light as the thousands of mornings before it. The gardener walked the familiar path, his boots crunching against the dry, compacted soil of the nursery. He carried the bucket, his movements mechanical, his mind braced for the usual sight of flat, brown earth. He reached the patch and knelt, setting the bucket down with a soft thud. He reached out to clear a stray pebble from the center, his fingers brushing the surface. He paused. His hand hovered an inch above the ground. There was a hairline fracture in the crust, a jagged line that had not been there the evening prior. He leaned in, his breath hitching, his eyes narrowing against the morning glare. A tiny, vibrant green point was pushing upward, piercing the hard, sun-baked layer of dirt. It was no larger than a single blade of grass, yet it stood rigid against the resistance of the soil. The gardener pulled his hand back, his heart hammering. He did not move. He did not reach for the water. He simply watched as the tiny tip vibrated, straining against the final grains of earth. The silence shattered. The sprout did not pause. By the next morning, it had gained a full inch, its color deepening from a pale lime to a vibrant, healthy emerald. The gardener watched, his shovel forgotten in the dirt. By the end of the week, the shoot stood a foot tall, its structure hardening into a rigid, woody cylinder. Then, the acceleration began. The stalk thickened, the fibers expanding with a low, rhythmic creak that echoed through the nursery. It shot upward, defying the pull of gravity with terrifying speed. The gardener stepped back, his boots sliding through the dust as the plant surged past his waist, then his shoulders. It rose 10 feet, then 20, the tip blurring as it punched through the air. The growth was relentless, an unstoppable vertical force that turned the fragile sprout into a massive, sturdy pillar. Within a few short weeks, the bamboo reached 50 feet, its surface smooth and taut. The nursery floor trembled under the pressure of the rising weight. The gardener looked up, his neck craning to track the tip as it continued to climb, a swaying giant that dominated the horizon. The air around the stalk hummed with the energy of its ascent. It was no longer a plant. It was a monument of raw, kinetic life. The ascent finally slowed, then stopped. The bamboo stood 90 feet tall, a colossal pillar of green that seemed to hold up the clouds. Its canopy swayed in the high wind, a massive, rustling giant that cast a long, dark shadow across the nursery floor. The neighbors, who had once walked past with smirks and mocking questions, now gathered at the edge of the patch. They stopped in their tracks. The laughter died in their throats as they looked up, their heads tilted back, eyes wide as they traced the length of the stalk. The sheer scale of the plant was impossible to ignore. It dominated the landscape, turning the once barren nursery into a place of sudden, overwhelming gravity. They stood in the dense, cool shadow, shifting their weight nervously, their voices reduced to hushed whispers. They moved closer, reaching out to touch the base. The silence of the crowd was heavy, filled with the realization that their judgment had been wrong. They looked at the gardener, then back at the towering height. The giant stood motionless, a silent monument to the years of work. The nursery was no longer a place of dust and failure. It was the site of a miracle. The neighbors crowded around, their voices rising in a chorus of confused demands. They pointed at the massive stalk, asking how a barren patch of dirt could produce such a miracle in mere weeks. The gardener did not rush to answer. He leaned heavily on his shovel, his calloused hands gripping the worn wood, and looked down at the earth. He knelt, brushing away the top layer of dust to reveal the dense, tangled web of roots that had spent 5 years anchoring themselves deep into the soil. He gestured to the dark, intricate network hidden beneath the surface. He stood up, his joints popping, and faced the silent crowd. "Growth is happening, even when you cannot see it," he said. The words hung in the air, heavier than the bamboo itself. He did not wait for their response. He picked up his empty bucket, the metal handle clinking against his side, and turned away from the towering pillar. He walked past the edge of the nursery, his boots crunching steadily on the dry path. He did not look back at the giant he had raised, or the people left standing in its shadow. He simply kept walking, his pace measured and calm. The lesson was not in the height of the tree, but in the years of water and silence that preceded it. Be patient. Keep going. The path ahead was long, and the work was never truly finished.